we'll give people a few minutes to come in. And Majid, I'll call on you after Sonia and John to introduce the panelists and take over from that session. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we're going to get a kickstart into today's session. First of all, a warm welcome to you all. And I know a lot of you are joining from around the world, so thank you for joining us. We're excited to kick off the 7th edition of Angel Rising, which is our annual investor education symposium, co-hosted by NYU Abu Dhabi, startAD, and VentureSouq, along with our partners this year, KAUST, Waed from Aramco, the United States Mission to the UAE, and Soma Mater. Over the last 7 years, Angel Rising has brought 75 speakers and around 2,500 participants together with a digital reach of 9 million people globally. In this time, we witnessed the growth of the investment landscape in the region. And we believe that multi-stakeholder knowledge sharing is still needed to nurture this ecosystem even further. So this year's theme is food tech for thought. Why? Because food security has been top of mind here in the MENA region. And so we chose to delve deeper into the role technology plays in addressing challenges and opportunities in this space. Over the next 2 days, we'll be joined by a stellar roster of panelists, each of whom will share their insights and their experiences as founders, investors, academics, and ecosystem enablers. This event, Angel Rising, also comes as the culmination of the Conscious Investor Fellowship, which is an 8-week pan-regional program that startAD and VentureSouq launched in 2020, focused on nurturing the next generation of senior-level stakeholders from a variety of backgrounds. SIF fellows aim to contribute to extraordinary change personally and within the organizations they lead, equipped with the right strategic tools they need to do so. So, who are you here with today in this virtual amphitheater? Here are some stats. Over 65% of you are from the MENA region. Some of you have already embarked on the startup investment journey with a keen interest in, no surprise here, food tech and ag tech. As we spend time together this week, I invite you to reflect on the current food system and how we, both as individuals and collectively, can shape our presence within this value chain. What are you going to learn over the next 2 days that is going to bring you to action when it comes to exploring the role technology plays in food security? Today, our Angel Rising community has grown, bound by the mission of improving our world by harnessing the power of tech for good, with the spirit of conscientious entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining us and enjoy.
Thank you, Sonia. Welcome everyone once again to the 7th annual edition of the Angel Rising Investor Education Symposium. We know it's an intense time for everyone with all the events taking place in the ecosystem, Expo winding down soon, Ramadan approaching soon. So we know it's a full calendar, and we are very grateful for all of you for taking the time to be here today. Every year for the last 6 years, startAD, along with our partners VentureSouq, have endeavored to bring some of the most credible voices in investment worldwide to demystify what it means to be a startup investor and to grow in the ecosystem. This year, we have a 2-day program taking place today and tomorrow, where we are going to be diving into food tech for thought. Before we start, we have a message from our leaders, the CEO of Tamkeen, John Tate.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Angel Rising 2022. My name is John Tate, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Tamkeen, the Abu Dhabi company proud to have founded and to back startAD under the inspiring leadership of Professor Ramesh Jagannathan. Tamkeen exists to promote projects in the social, cultural, educational landscape of Abu Dhabi, and foremost amongst those projects is NYU AD. Over the last decade, this fantastic university has become an Abu Dhabian global force for knowledge development. Harnessing the entrepreneurial talent around it was always a key aim of ours for NYU AD, and I'm delighted that startAD has been carrying on that mission now since September 2016. To date, I'm very proud to say that under Ramesh's leadership, startAD has accelerated 314 startups, created over 270 jobs, and raised more than $80 million in investment. Angel Rising 2022 coincides with the announcement of several important developments and new laws in the UAE designed to make it an even more attractive location for entrepreneurial activity. These new laws and the new frameworks around them will provide an even more flexible approach to business, and in particular to small business and business startups. Part of that is reflected already in the fact that the UAE last year attracted more foreign capital than anywhere else in the region. And startAD is delighted to play its part in helping make that a continuing story of success. Over the past 2 years, COVID, of course, has reminded us of the importance to invest through the adverse times for the better times that are coming right now. And indeed, also to look to pandemic preparedness and global health innovations. According to the World Bank, the pandemic has also exposed the fragility of our global food supply system and the supply chains around it, creating an imperative for us to innovate and look to the future of food and food production with the same urgency as we've been looking in the past to tech and healthcare and other exciting sectors. In the UAE, the particular desert climate does make it more challenging in various ways to look to the future of food supply and food security. 1% of the land only is arable. Currently, 80 to 90% of the food requirement is imported to a population that's more than tripled to 10 million over the past 20 years. Global warming, which is expected to increase the UAE's average temperature by 2.5 Celsius by 2050, will only exacerbate this challenge. So the focus appropriately for Angel Rising 2022 is food tech for thought. A very timely focus, and I'm looking forward to the insightful discussion that will ensue in this event. At Tamkeen, we've been working in the area of food tech for some time, and I'm delighted to say that we've just launched yesterday the second iteration of the Food Tech Challenge, a $2 million prize designed to attract food-related innovation to the UAE. Initiatives like the Food Tech Challenge, Angel Rising, and indeed startAD itself are vital to UAE's startup ecology, and in particular now we hope to UAE's National Food Security Strategy 2051. Under this ambitious strategy, the UAE is aiming to be #1 in the world in the Global Food Security Index, an important call to action. So thank you all for your time and your attendance. If you're wondering When is the right time to start your business in the UAE? It's right now, and Angel Rising, startAD are here for you.
Thank you, John. On that note, we will dive into our first panel for the day, looking at the different phases of production. This panel will cover the ways on how local and international entrepreneurs are building inclusive and efficient food systems, leveraging new technologies and existing infrastructure and practices. We will try to answer the questions such as, how do we educate consumers on new technology? How do we envision the new future farm across different geographies? And what are the current opportunities and gaps in the market for new products to nurture the next generations? I invite Majid Al-Qasimi, a conscious investor fellow of startAD and VentureSouq, and the founder of Soma Mata, to kickstart the session, introduce the panelists, and dive right in. Majid, over to you.
Thank you very much, guys. Really excited to be here, and I'm not going to lose too much time. We're going to get right into it. I'd like to welcome the panelists we have today. First off, Anshuman Bapna is the founder of startAD. We have Justine Damt, who's the co-founder of Shake Your Plants. We have Henry Gordon-Smith, founder of Agritecture, and Nicole Rogers, founder of Drawdown Foods. Rather than butcher your names and what you guys do, I thought it probably best that you each maybe take a minute and share with everybody who's with us today what specifically you guys are doing in the food system. I will keep it to 1, maybe 2 minutes max, and then we can get right into the thick of it. So we'll just start with the order I announced you in. So Anshuman, why don't you tell us about what you are doing at startAD?
Thanks, Majid, and great to see everyone here. I'm calling in from Stanford, California, which used to be paradise, and now with the wildfires going on, is just one more of the places around the world which is hit by climate change, and definitely viscerally at that. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I started a company called startAD a couple of years ago to solve the problem that I had, which was, as a professional working outside of the climate space, but really anxious about it, how could I use my skills to have the maximum impact in the space? So startAD is an online platform for climate learning and jobs and community. And among many things that we do, one of the things that we focus a lot on is food and ag and food systems in general. We run a bunch of different programs for mid-career professionals. And one of them is, my favorite, is the Climate Farm School, where we take individuals into farms that are practicing regenerative practices across the world, get them to stay there during the day and study in the night, and get their hands dirty, both metaphorically and literally. So I'll love to talk more about that, especially around consumer education on food systems and climate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Justine, you have the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm an entrepreneur in the plant-based industry. I exited my business before COVID. We were doing different type of snacks, vegan and gluten-free. So I'm very passionate about the food of the future and the plant-based industry in general. And as an entrepreneur, I've noticed how much food was wasted and resources were wasted along the supply chain. So I focused my energy in the past 18 months to create a SIP that stands for Shake Your Plants, and we are direct-to-consumer startups that creating next-gen food and drinks, instant food and drinks. So what does that mean? It means that we are making sachets out of lost resources, and we can get into the difference between lost and wasted after that. But so we take lost resources and we turn it into functional, instant food and drinks. And of course, we're trying to reach carbon neutrality, and we're producing the more consciously as possible. So that's our mission.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Henry, you're up next.
Thank you, Majid, and thanks everyone for having me. I'm Henry, the founder and CEO of Agritecture. 10 years ago, I was looking out over my balcony and I saw this empty rooftop on top of a supermarket. And I said, why isn't there a farm on there? And I started digging online and trying to find data on yields and different ways of producing food in the city. And I was very disappointed that I couldn't get the ideas and the data that I needed to sort of turn my idea into reality. And so that's when I started Agritecture. And we started as a blog, really covering different urban farms around the world and trying to promote data sharing and transparency on it to encourage a new generation of entrepreneurs to get involved in the climate change issue and to grow more food locally in the city. And so there's three main things we do. We continue to operate the most popular blog in controlled environment agriculture, and we share knowledge, we run surveys, we produce a lot of free content and research. The second part of our business is our consulting practice. We design farms all around the world. We advise governments. We do due diligence for investors and advise corporations. And we've worked on over 160 consultations in 35 countries. So quite global, a lot of different climates, a lot of different technologies and conditions. And more recently, again, related to that mission of getting the lack of or accessing the data that's lacking, we launched Agritecture Designer, which is our first software, and it allows you to estimate the CapEx, OpEx, yield, and sustainability metrics of any greenhouse or vertical farm on Earth, and is adapted to various climate conditions that are pre-uploaded on there, and allows users to learn, to conduct their own market research, and even connect to financing and supplier solutions directly on the same platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henry. And last but definitely not least, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. It's nice. I'm on a panel with everyone I know. Thanks for having me. It's like such a friendly group of faces. So my name is Nicole Rogers. I'm a Canadian. I lived many years with some of you on this panel in Dubai, where I ran a boutique agri advisory and investment firm. And now I live in Kenya. So that's where I'm speaking to you from, Nairobi. And I'm here because we made an investment that we wanted to scale. And the hypothesis is that we can make it easier for SME companies to source custom and proprietary food ingredients. And Africa is a really, impactful place to do that for both the climate story, which sounds like we have some shared interests on this in this group, but also for human impact. And so our aim is we're shifting what is traditionally a Northern Hemisphere ingredient manufacturing system into the African market. And so we make everything from flavor products to functional ingredients, things that are made, things that make manufactured food products more nutritious or taste better or work at scale.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. So a little bit of sort of some context for how this panel is going to work. It's really about getting everybody to contribute. I want a natural conversation. It's a little trick I learned from Sonia, actually, on a different panel. And so I'm just going to get right into it, and we're going to have a conversation, and hopefully we can draw some light on this. And ultimately, the major challenge in any market is behavioral change, right? And with food, even more so. You can just ask my kids. Personally, I see education and awareness is a cornerstone to achieve this, but what are your companies doing? What are you doing to educate your clients and then more the broader stakeholders? And if you could share examples of both success and failure, I think that would be really valuable for the group. And please go ahead and jump in as we're among friends here.
All right. Well, I'm taking that, taking a chance. Well, I consciously say that we are trying our best to produce consciously because, I think it's a journey. And in our case, we are, we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of energy with a lot of you guys, actually, because we hire a lot of interns from NYU Abu Dhabi. So I'm sure the students will recognize themselves here to try to measure the carbon footprint of our products. And, that's a challenge as a small company and, relying on different suppliers. And of course, we are a direct to consumer, we're creating the product, but then we outsourcing a lot of our supply chain to different partners. So how do you measure that? Where do you stop? And like in our case, we decided to be totally transparent with our users. So like we are showing behind the scene on social. Like we are very open. We soft launching at the moment, so we're writing as well blogs on like how do we measure every product. We try to have like a QR code on each product that we are releasing, so like that like the story can evolve, and like it's a journey. So we are where we are now, with the resources that we are. It will be a total different game, and we have like very ambitious goals for next year. But like I think our point of view on that regard is just to be like total transparent with our user and to take them through the backside, behind the scenes of the journey on how we're sourcing ingredients, on how we're measuring carbon, what project we are supporting to offset our carbon, and we will take the audience with us to this journey.
So Justine, you're dealing directly with consumers for your products,
yes,
right? The others on the panel with us, you guys are dealing with other businesses. So I wonder, maybe Henry and Nicole.
I'll go next. So, education is obviously a big part of our origin story and our DNA. And here's just a couple of different examples of what we've done. So, I mean, the blog is one of them. So we produced thousands of blog posts and been consistent about that to share knowledge. And that's been very effective for us, both in making an impact. We hear from a lot of people who have said, oh, I heard about the company I work for through your blog. So we're sort of connecting and enabling the ecosystem. That happens a lot. And so you sort of really don't know, what that impact of sharing free knowledge could have sometimes until you continually do it. And so I really encourage that, especially elevating the discussion, right? Being honest, pushing transparency, pushing some controversial topics sometimes is also very effective. And it also generates a lot of business for us and leads because it's thought leadership and reputation management. We also started online in-person classes, which would sell out. And then we made those classes online. Again, just try to teach best practices. And for those that really want to, get a more sophisticated understanding. Some projects that have had less of a good performance include, we sometimes get frustrated by what's happening in the sector. And we say, okay, what can we do to disrupt or innovate here? One example is this idea of growing food at home. And there's just this like sort of rush of people growing hydroponic systems at home. And it ends up being a lot of plastic that you give to someone and they use it once and they don't know how to take care of it and they throw it out. So we got really frustrated with that, as well as the high cost of them. So we decided, let's hire someone and dedicate them to developing with our team an open source version of this. And so we built Plus Farm, and it's an open source vertical farm that's low cost. And it's for schools or anyone at home that wants to do this. And it's way cheaper from a per plant basis than other options. And we make really no money off of it. And it was just a contribution. But the fact is, we learned that without marketing it heavily and having a big budget for it, people aren't really going to learn about it that much. And so we sort of started to get in this place where we had competing interests about what we marketed on our blog because we made money off other things. So it still exists. You could just download the instructions and learn everything you need. But it's, there's maybe been like 25 of them built. So it's, it's not as big of an impact. So sometimes, open source or democratizing this can be relatively, limited in that sense of the impact. And I think the other piece is just, really sharing data. And this is what we do through our annual census, which has been a great success. It's probably like the most robust database and context of what the CEA sector is at right now from a sustainability perspective or a COVID-19 perspective. So I think just really focusing on targeted education and also willing to go the extra mile to continue to market it and remarket it to people is very important and has worked for us well there.
Cool. Thank you, Henry. Nicole, Anshuman, who wants to go next?
Go for it, Nicole. I'm happy to go last.
Sure. We have a different perspective, I think. So our business is recognizing that there's great entrepreneurs like Justine and clients that Henry has that are trying to address I think, undeniable consumer demand for traceability and storytelling. And so what our job is in the system is actually educating the food maker or the food grower on how to go beyond certification, because certification is actually maybe this is a controversial statement, but I know Henry will agree with me. And I think actually Justine will too. And
Yes.
actually probably Anshuman, you will too. Certifications are really on the way out because it's impossible to enforce them at scale from a global perspective. So our role in the system of change, or to give an example, is to help educate a food company on how they can address the demand that they want to, because that's why the venture groups have backed them. And that's why it's effectively their business model is to create revenue multiples and on that story. And so why this works in Africa is a lot of this is about decentralization, and you're changing a whole food system. And that involves a lot of education, because in food, you have something that's made in a kitchen, and then you have something that is scaled and has to be made en masse. And everything that goes into food products is made largely by a really small amount of players on the world. And things like garlic or onion or things that are really prolific in food come from like one place on the planet.
Very centralized,
and not just,
yeah.
Yeah, and not like one place, like, 100 acre, like it's just crazy, and consumers don't understand it, and food companies don't understand it. So to address that demand, which none of us will deny and is here to stay, you have to kind of build a new value chain. You have to really have partners and buyers, and I think really drill down on what the disruption looks like at scale. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, our mandate, our role, and what we feel really passionately about is making it financially viable. Because like, if it's not, then no small company starting out like Justine, who has backing, can go and find the right ingredient for her product. So it's like a systems change, I guess, in some that I think we all have to support in an ecosystem. And we're all doing, I guess, why it's a good panel, why it's a good group of people, right?
And how does that work with what you guys do, Nicole? Are you connecting the dots? Are you bringing and educating the buyers essentially on new sources?
Good point, Magic. No, we're like an actual maker, so we're a manufacturer.
Yeah.
So somebody has to like make something in the middle. Yeah. So
this is exactly what I was trying to drill down.
Sorry, terrible. I'm also the worst at explaining my business for anyone else who's on this panel. They're very aware. It's a really good business if someone else explains it, not me. Excellent at the fun. I'm excellent at the fundamentals of the business, which is my job. But basically, we're building that platform that allows something that's really basic to become an ingredient product. Because ingredients largely start with super simple components, and then we do a really good job of making it very complicated. Like garlic powder has like 12 steps to be garlic powder.
Oh, awesome.
It's a garlic, but it's not in the end, it's something else, and most food products go through this progression. So we're a hardware company. We build mainly dehydration technology that's Africa-centric. Cool. So continents like Africa, and I would say actually most of Asia, they need tech that's built for them in food systems. Mm-hmm. Like Henry knows this. You can't just take something from California and put it in.
Always the case.
It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, but it's amazing how that's an education that needs to happen too, right? Because investors don't know that, and big food companies don't know that.
The assumption that everything is industrializable from one machine's perspective. Yeah.
100%. So that's mainly what we do. And then we use a lot of super high labor techniques, because again, in emerging markets, if you're going to shift from north-south processing, labor is the serious hack, so that you can offer better quality and same price, which is kind of the holy grail in ingredients. So yeah, trying to give a more kitchen-centered technique to a space. Because really, even the most natural of food, most of the stuff in it goes through a really unnatural process in the middle. It's just the truth. Yeah.
No, thank you, Nicole. And to that point about that labor, Anshuman, I think this is where you come in, where we're talking about education of the labor and all the people that are looking for these opportunities. I want maybe if you'd explain a bit how that works from what you guys are doing.
Yeah, no, in fact, I'll go back to the original phrasing of your question that gave me the heebie-jeebies as a founder, which is behavior change, right? I've had many a startup die on the vine trying to attempt that, not just in climate, but across every single sector that you can imagine. And on top of that, our mission, the reason why Terra exists, is to get 100 million people working in climate this decade. So therefore, behavior change is, whether we like it or not, a part of what we have to do and crack. Now, there is, however, a hack. And that hack is essentially the fact that this whole dichotomy between a producer and a consumer might not be all that there is to it. So what we have found, for example, is that there are all these individuals in between who you would not think of as either food entrepreneurs or even as pure passive consumers who are raising their hands suddenly. And I think the pandemic has a role to play. So I think what I feel really happened is that we've always had people who have been home gardening, for example, right, or making their own food in some shape or form. And then, of course, the pandemic hits, and then for 2 years, you're stuck inside your own private world, looking at everything that you do in a lot more detail and understanding that you don't really have a holistic relationship with a bunch of these things, including your food. And that started people down this path and get to the point where they're saying, look, I want to not only understand this, but get my hands dirty. Now, to what end, right? So I'll give you an example of the kind of people who show up in our programs. So we have, say, a 25-year-old who wants to start market gardens in the area that they live in, and they want to change their college dining commons to now have a lot more sustainable, locally grown food, as an example, right? So one classic example at one end. But at the other end, you would have someone who's been working in international development for like 30 years, looking at food systems, sitting inside the World Bank, writing out reports, and then suddenly realizing that, look, I don't think I really understand the problem that I've been working on for the past 30 years until I speak to farmers, soil scientists, chefs, cooks, local food policymakers, and so on. So they really want to get their hands dirty. And I think it's a bit of a movement that I think has gotten created. And instead of trying to change the behavior of someone who is skeptical or completely unawares of where our food comes from, I think there is this significantly smaller but highly potentially viral set of community of individuals who are already food conscious, who just needs to be nudged in the right direction. And that's what I think is the biggest bang for the buck as far as education on the consumer side is concerned. A lot of them turn into food entrepreneurs, but that might be just one of the many paths they might take.
No, I love that. And I think what's interesting, where we're sort of gravitating towards in this conversation, where, as Anshuman's mentioned, it's not just producers and consumers. Ultimately, there's all these people along the way. My question to you then is, consumers, we understand, moving backwards through that, and you guys are all playing your part in that chain. But ultimately, right at the beginning, those producers, what do you guys see from your different perspectives as core? What is the future farmer going to look like? And each of you will have maybe a slightly different perspective from how you are dealing with your side of the business. But ultimately, what are you seeing as core skills? We're talking about a legacy of traditional farming globally about to retire. And modern food, when we're talking about powdered ingredients, some of it has to be in the soil, some of it's coming from greenhouses. Ultimately, a lot of plant-based as well as animal-based proteins coming into the system. From your perspective, what is tomorrow's farmer going to have to know?
Look, there's really so many different kinds of farms and farmers, first of all, but I guess in the area where I'm working, it's controlled environment agriculture is a lot of it, greenhouses and vertical farms that are very sexy right now and getting billions of dollars of investment. And so we are in the midst of a National Science Foundation grant that was awarded to Cornell and Agritecture to investigate what is the future talent for this sector. And there's a couple of things that are really interesting to look at. I mean, first of all, based on our census, about 50% of the current operators of CEA facilities have 0 years of agriculture experience. Now, that doesn't mean the grower does, but the actual operators and the owners of that. So that's one piece of it. So what we see a lot is there's a big divide between the owner of the business, especially especially with tech-focused ag business, and the growers. Growers tend to be, I mean, I'm generalizing, but in my sector, they tend to be, more conservative. They don't like to push the hype. They don't like to exaggerate. They don't like to greenwash. They just like to really sort of run their facilities properly, watch out for details, do all of that. Now, the CEOs, they want to really raise a lot of money and encourage this. So they want to tell a tech-driven ag story that sometimes is really in direct conflict with actual horticulture science, right? There are biological limits to how quickly we can grow plants. I'm sorry to say that to all the VC investors, but there are actual limits there. So the growers and them sort of have a bit of debate and conflict. And actually, we see a lot of growers being pushed out of companies or leaving companies because of that divide. And so the next grower sort of needs to have more of a business mindset in order to communicate, at least with those CEOs, because there's validity to both sides of that story. And I think also another part of it is that as we move from sort of horizontal thinking when it comes to agriculture more towards vertical thinking, there's a sort of three-dimensional plane of exploration that's important. And so that means that there is a new ability or more of an emphasis on the need to understand technology and engineering beyond the horticulture best practices. And there is also a little bit of marketing involved in that too, right? Because people want to know their farmer. So now you need farmers that are also charismatic and can speak to CNBC about the future of agriculture or whatever they're doing next, or create social media content. So suddenly this person is, really this superhero that has a lot of multifaceted skills, and that's really needed. And so we had this really interesting workshop that we did where we brought 35 different controlled environment agriculture growers to New York City from around the world and went through a methodology to think about what's the right training curriculum to give the future generations these talents. And those are just some of the highlights of what we discovered from the most successful, long-term growers in this sector in particular.
If I can jump in, so
yeah, go ahead.
In intro, I was mentioning the difference between food loss and food waste. I would just go back to that. Food loss is actually at the source, just for everybody to know. So it's 20% of the resources that never leave the farm of the produce, food, vegetables, roots. And then it's considered food waste when it starts to go within, the supply chain. So if you ask me what's, and once again, we are in a position which is the link between the agri-tech and, the farmers. We are, making a product that is the missing link that we think is the missing link between these two parties. So we are in a specific, position in this supply chain. But from that point of view, if I may, I think the future of agriculture is within this 20%. It's educating the farmers on what to do with this 20%. And most of the time, over the years, it's actually cheaper to just throw away this 20% or this, I don't know, get rid of it in some ways, than trying to transform it with, through company like us. Because of course, with the volume that we currently have, it's not really valuable for the farmers. They don't really see, at least at our level, that's why it's so hard for a startup like us to deal directly with farmers, because they don't see the added value on the short term. So, that's when, Nicole comes in and hopefully, be able to make a bigger volume and distribute, this lost into, transform this lost into ingredients that then, we all buy as different startups, and that create values.
Yeah, it's distributed. That's the word. This is distributed system. Farms are going to be distributed more so. The buyers are distributed. The consumer is distributed. Everybody is so much more distributed than they were even 5 years ago. It's crazy. and I guess it becomes more flat in that distributed model. So hopefully the farmer is just more connected. Because you know what, I actually disagree. I wish there didn't need to be someone who built an industrial process in the middle. I think that is the reality, but it should be that Justine, if she wants to devote 60% of her manpower and funding and everything to try and source directly, she should be able to. But it's the system doesn't work.
We tried.
I know. I know.
I said that 18 months on the project, that's what I was trying to do, and that's shows how hard it is to source, consciously, and to be able to trace every single ingredient directly to farm as a small startup. And we tried in the UAE, we tried in Kenya, we tried in different countries, and I'm not giving up. Like that's going to be like the third phase of our project. But we needed some kind of big guy in the middle to help us transform this waste, this loss, into the powder that we're using for our nutritional products.
Can I tell a story to the panel? Sorry, before you start, because it's like an interest. I think people will like the story, and it's a
Sonia's
story
going to come in and say, no stories, because we're banging on time.
No, I wasn't. I was just smiling. I was looking forward to hearing the story.
Okay, I think you know. I think you know the story, so you might be bored of it.
I don't know. I want to give Anjuman the chance to have some input here, and then we'll come back to Nicole's story. I do want to hear the story.
I would love to go for the story. I don't think my comment is half as interesting as the story. So go for it, Nicole.
Oh God, no pressure. Okay, it's actually a really terrible story. No, I'm just kidding. Nicole. But the craziest thing I learned to follow on to Justine's waste story, which is probably a really interesting dynamic, honestly, and an opportunity for farms in every kind of farming, is the impact of a buyer on waste. And it's not just 20%, it's way more than that. And so here in a country like Kenya, the agriculture sector has developed largely for export, and it's fresh export. So it's a country that exports water, and it is wild. And so someone like Henry is going after this and saying, okay, can we not find a more economic way to grow the things that are getting on an airplane? Someone like Anjuman is saying, can we not actually have someone's profession to, lobby Tesco and Sainsbury's so that they're not these are not small brands that are doing this. So the thing that costs £1 has something on the package mandatory by the UK government that says actually the real cost of that to the climate and everything else or whatever. But then the craziest thing about this food system that we found here in Kenya is that we as a consumer want that £1 cello bag, or £1, I mean $1, Great British pound, just not British a pound. Yeah. Exactly, like in a currency that costs nothing. We want it cello wrapped. We want it perfect. We want that tender stem broccoli or whatever it is. For every, say, 100 kgs sourced in this way from a retailer, they plant a minimum 80 kg overage.
That is the inefficiency of that is ridiculous. Yeah.
And that 80 kgs, you can just keep scaling it up over and over again. That 80 kgs, for Justine's point of what is food loss, what is food waste, that is an insane amount of produce around the world. It's staggering, and nobody's accounting for it, and people don't know. And it's really, really big companies that are involved in this entire food systems crisis, honestly. And so distribution of everything is, we're in a race to make everything cost £1. And it's really crazy if you actually dissect how it's working today.
Yeah, there's also, we've talked about distribution a couple of times now, where what we're seeing, what was a very centralized agricultural system, where you guys are all involved, is starting to break it up again and try to source from independence. 100%. Consolidate, sure, from a resourcing for functional ability, for Justine, for instance. But the problem is that sort of next check at the retailer is there are spec sheets from fresh produce and vegetables. This means for every 1 kilo, you've got X times many that are not making it to market. Where are they going? 100%. And ultimately, if you can circumvent the retailer and go straight direct to consumer, whether it's in form of direct to consumer products like Justine's and Shake Your Plants, there are a number of ways that tech can leverage the data. Henry's doing it on the CEA side of things, the distribution side of things, and ultimately the education of teaching people to see this stuff in the ecosystem, where really Anjuman is creating the opportunity. Henry also creating the opportunity, the transparency that Justine has in the social side is this movement that Anshuman was talking about is, hey guys, we've all woken up to it. Now, how do we make it more ubiquitous as a conversation piece? Yeah.
Totally.
Sorry, Anshuman. Now you've got your input, or did the story just crash?
No, I think I'll just, I want to share this organization that I came across, which I think is quite illustrative of the approach, of one of the possible approaches to solve for this. So it's a ocean aquaculture company based out of Cape Cod called Green Wave. And what these guys did is that they came up with this whole notion that you could do this 3D cage farming. Henry seems to know about this. And you could do 3D cage farming. You can just drop it in the ocean and you can harvest it every 3 months, and it'll fill up with sea kelp and marine animals and so on. Now, all that's fine and dandy, one amongst many cool ideas in the food tech world that people would come up with. What they did next was really inspiring, which is they said, look, half of American coastline is already ready for a solution like this. We as a company alone will not be able to get there. How about we create a bit of an ecosystem? So they got folks like Patagonia to sponsor training for fishermen. The cages themselves are not huge capex. So the fishermen would fly into their training facilities, and now they started doing online as well. But more importantly, they went out and did forward contracts with buyers, wholesale buyers of fisheries, where they said, look, if this practice was used in this, then these wholesale fishery buyers will have these forward contracts of a certain amount that would be guaranteed purchases that they would make. So therefore de-risking the business even more. And finally, partnering with cool organizations, like including Google, by the way, to run these challenges to solve specific parts of the problem. So for example, they have a challenge which is around how to make seaweed products a lot more attractive for end consumers. So chef challenges that allow these kind of products to be made. So there's an interesting thing, which is that there's no central large company at the heart of this, right? Essentially, this is a coordination mechanism across a bunch of ecosystem players that have a mutual interest. And if anything, I would say, maybe I'm the eternal internet optimist, which is what has really happened is that in the past 20 years, the cost of coordination has come down dramatically, even in something like food and ag. So maybe there's something in there, some models in there that are worth experimenting within local regional ecosystems.
I couldn't have orchestrated this. I can't believe Anshuman has literally served up the last sort of segue for me so beautifully, because my question was going to be to everybody on the panel here. Ultimately, if we're talking about the ecosystem and we're talking about what really needs to change, how are we going to make this transition to a new food system more effective? For each of you, you're butting your heads against doors and walls. And I wanted to be able to illustrate for everybody that, as exciting as it can be, there are going to be some challenges and there are opportunities. And maybe if you guys would share yours, we'd get some sort of perspective on things.
Look, I'm a mission-driven entrepreneur and I'm not giving up any time. So that is for sure. And my whole team is on it. But I have to be totally honest that I don't have a huge amount of faith based on where I see a lot of the investment going, the hype, the greenwashing, the misplaced policies and incentives, the continued waste, the lack of actually valuing our food system from consumers. So we really have a lot to still do. I mean, and I think even though there's so much excitement in the sector, it's just not, it's just not moving the needle as much as we need to. And I think that when I think about human nature, we tend to let disaster occur, whether it's in our own personal lives or in the world around us, before we act. And so I think a lot of, what I think about is what can we do to prepare as much as possible for that disaster when the actual shifts happen. And I think that's really the best that I can offer there.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Henry. Thoughts from the others?
Yeah, well, I read actually in the deck in the data that Sonia shared earlier, in this call, that $10.5 billion has been invested over 751 deal last year in agri-tech. So that's a lot of money, and it's wonderful. But from my point of view, is like I say, I think there is a missing link between the farmers and the tech. And that is, direct to consumer startups like us. And, you can probably name on like one end, like the deals on direct to consumer, especially like lead and founded here in the UAE that been doing something with farms that I received funding. Actually, I can't even think about one. And like that's what we're trying to do. So it is difficult to educate, farmers, to educate investors to what we're trying to do. And I think investment in that direction towards like a concrete solution, a concrete product, a tangible solution that transform loss in produce would be like a good way to go.
Cool.
The region.
We're about to wrap up, so we've just hit the mark on our minutes. I want to give Nicole and Anshuman literally your 2 cents quickly, if you can do that. Want to keep on time here.
I was just going to reinforce what Henry said. It's not just greenwashing from investors, it's the major players in the global systems. So for ingredients, I personally met with the leaders of pretty much every major publicly traded or massive ingredient company, and they sit and say that the market doesn't reflect what we say. So they say that the demand is not for climate neutrality. The demand is not for sustainability. They truly say, they're like, people want function and flavor, and that is it. It's fascinating. Yeah. So that's that. So cool. If those guys aren't changing, it's never changing, man.
There you go. Anshuman, closing out.
I think food is politics, and that's how change happens. If you look at the one type of, among others, who might not be represented in this panel, it's someone who understands the political dimension of what food is. And the way you get there is through consumer activation and turning passive consumers into active participants in this food system. So to me, that's the one way to kind of think about this, and I'll just shut up there.
No, thank you so much, guys. This has been my favorite panel ever, full stop. Really appreciate all the input. It's so passionate and honestly also really cutting the mustard. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you for the opportunity to share your thoughts with us.
Thanks, Majid.
Great job, thanks, Majid.
Good to see you, Nicole.
Yeah, you too, Henry. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Nice meeting you. Bye.
Nihal, I think you've got the mic now.
Thank you, Majid. And once again, thanks to Henry, Justine, Anshuman, and Nicole for this candid and engaging insights. It was wonderful having them, and we should do more of this. We should dive into this a bit more in our follow-up sessions. Thank you once again, Majid. We will now take a short 10-minute break, and we will reconvene at 7 p.m. So stay there, go grab a coffee, go grab some water, and come back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
It's the thought of PM when your heart's just like a drum, beating louder with nowhere to guard it. When it all seems like it's wrong, sing along to Elton John, and to that feeling we're just getting started. When the nights get colder and the rhythm's got you falling behind, just dream about that moment when you look yourself right in the eye. Then you say, I wanna dance, the music's got me going, and nothing that can stop how we move. Yeah, let's make a place and live just like we're golden and rolling like we're dancing fools. We don't need to worry, just when we fall we know how to dance. Don't need to talk the talk, just walk the walk tonight. 'Cause we don't need permission. that we can keep the fire alive. Cause it's not over till the summer. Say one more time. Say, I wanna dance to music's got me going. Nothing that can stop how we move. Hey, let's break our bands and live just like we're golden and growing like we're dancing fools. Like we're dancing fools. We don't need to worry, 'cause when we fall we know how to lay. Know how to talk the talk, just walk the walk tonight. 'Cause we don't need permission to dance. Da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na. We don't need permission to dance. Da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na. 'Cause we don't need permission to dance. Da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na. We don't need permission to dance. Da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na. 'Cause we don't need permission to dance. I found a love for me. Darling, just dive right in. Follow my lead. Well, I found a girl, beautiful and sweet. Well, I never knew you were the someone waiting for me. 'Cause we were just kids when we fell in love, not knowing what it was. I will not give you up this time. Darling, just kiss me slow. Your heart is all I own, and in your eyes you're holding mine. Baby, I'm dancing in the dark with you between my arms, barefoot on the grass. We're listening to our favorite song. When you said you looked a mess, I whispered underneath my breath, but you heard it. Darling, you look perfect tonight. Well, I found a woman stronger than anyone I know. She shares my dreams. I hope that someday I'll share her home. I found a love to carry more than just my secrets, to carry love, to carry children of our own. We are still kids, but we're so in love, fighting against all odds. I know we'll be alright this time. Darling, just hold my hand. Be my girl, I'll be your man. I see my future in your eyes. Baby, I'm dancing in the dark with you between my arms, barefoot on the grass, listening to our favorite song. When I saw you in that dress, looking so beautiful, I don't deserve this. Darling, you look perfect tonight.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good, quick break and are refreshed and ready for our next panel. We are now going to dive into the role of capital in agri-food tech from seed to forest. We'll hear from Sophia from Future Positive Capital and Heather, the founding partner of Mindshift Capital, about the spectrum of funding that's available to companies, explore how new forms of financing based on ESG and impact-focused remits will benefit food and ag tech projects. I'll hand over the virtual mic to our moderator today, Keo Malufe, to welcome the panelists and kick off the session. Over to you, Keo.
Thank you very much. You guys hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys today, and I think that this is quite an important topic, especially after so many announcements over the past couple of months. So much speculation about where capital is going, and about just the moment in time where we are, where fundraising is hitting records everywhere throughout the food and ag value chain. And so I particularly find that there's a lot to talk about related to where capital adds value, where it doesn't, the type of investors that are coming about, the moment where we are, where a lot of non-traditionally food and agriculture investors are going into food and agriculture, and how the model is adapting from those who traditionally have invested in fintech or edtech or software or any other part, and going into something so specific and so new as food, and not just capital providers, but also actual companies that are establishing their own VC funds and are trying to find their ground really on what to do with the industry. And so I thought that it would be super interesting for us to touch on some of those topics. I wonder if it's helpful to kick off just with a very short comment from Heather and Sophia about what their thesis is for the industry in just a few short sentences, and we can kind of drive the conversation from there, if that makes sense. So if it does, I'll throw it to you, Heather, to start. If that's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kev, for the good kickoff of the panel. And thank you to startAD and VentureSouq for hosting this. I think it's great that we've got a whole couple of days dedicated to food tech and ag tech, which are, clearly at the helm of venture right now. I think, like Kyle said, it's just, there's a lot of interest, even from corporate VCs and some of the strategics that you might not see normally in this space. So it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. At Mindshift Capital, we're not solely focused on food tech. Our fund thesis is what we call the rise of the Zillennial, so Gen Z, millennial, new next-gen consumer values that are driving different business models and disruptive consumer behavior based on those changes in those values. And we see that, really just driving the change and the innovation that we see in the food space specifically. I think years ago, you never would have expected that like the largest German slaughterhouse would acquire a vegan Israeli company. So there's just some really interesting shifts that we see happening in the food space. And I'm sure we'll get more into that on the panel. We're also a gender lens VC. So that means we invest in companies where there's at least one female founder or co-founder. And that's our funnel, I would say, in terms of how we source deal flow. We're based out of Dubai and started out of the UAE, but we're investing globally. So we've got a pretty wide spectrum, and we've invested so far in this fund in 11 companies. One of the food tech companies I'm sure we'll talk more about is Shiok Meats, which is a Singaporean cell-based meats company. So so I'll stop there and leave it, and then look forward to Sophia's comments and just diving into the meat of the topic.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for the invite, guys. This is a very interesting topic and one that I'm particularly passionate about. So I started Future Positive Capital. It's a pan-European early stage fund based between Paris and London. And we basically invest in companies that develop advanced technology and or science. So all the companies have an edge on that front that is proven and protected, and tackle complex global challenges. And food and agriculture is obviously one of them. So I started to do this in 2016, and the two investment that are particularly relevant to this conversation are VentureSouq, which is today a leader in biorefinery of insect farming, and the other one a bit in the same space as others mentioned, which is Meatable, which develops cell-based meat without any serum. Yeah, that's it for me.
So I think that one of the things for us to think about is initially the landscape for food and agriculture is incredibly wide. And so maybe just for the purposes of this conversation, we can focus a little bit on the food side of things. And food tech is already a pretty wide universe. But I was curious about your thoughts. Maybe I'll throw it to Sophia first, about how do you break down the type of due diligence you conduct and value that you would like to add on two different types of deals. On the one hand, you have deals that are operational or soon to be operational. What I mean by that is like a plant-based company, for example. Plant-based company will either already have a product in the market or will have a product in the market in the next, I don't know, few months, versus a biotech company, like you mentioned, Meatable, for example, that's only going to have a product in a few years. Maybe there's a product a year or two from now, but it's going to be not really a lot of volume. And we're actually looking at scale production in a few years ahead. So how do you think about those two things? And how do you think about the value that your fund could add?
It's a very good question, really. And I think one that we dismiss a lot in the industry by just combining everything in that category. So that's true. Like it's an industry. Well, but there is, it's a very kind of vertical way of thinking about it. Well, in this industry, you have indeed biotech companies like Meatable. It's actually biotech company, so that's how it has to be treated. Then you have companies or industrial company, like they produce food, they produce with a different process, with a different technology, but fundamentally it's an agriculture business. So not necessarily friendly for venture capitalists. And then you have other companies who are allowing you to optimize some of things. So some of them are software based, some of them are delivery based. So there's a big difference between the upstream and the downstream of this value chain, and based and depending on that, you can position yourself as an investor. But that's true that I find that it's I see, for example, when we did the series B, C, and D of Insect, everyone was interested because of the thematic was food. But then when they realized the amount that was needed, the time frame that was needed, the capex that was needed, then you ended up with traditional investors in agriculture, and the people invested initially in the Series C and B and A, where people know how to scale those businesses. There was no mainstream VCs, So the way we think about it is, so for every industrial play with a very capex heavy, we actually have a different vehicle to do that. So it's an SPV, where we bring people who understand what it takes to build companies like that. Because the growth is certainly not like this or exponential. It's like this. You go from nothing to a big contract. And then you have a certain, and then it's by facility, right? The bigger the facility, the bigger the revenue, and you optimize along the way through science. But that's kind of the model, Well, it's just not at all a venture capital model. While with Meatable, it's much more a moonshot kind of potential that is kind of compatible with a venture model. So we have within our fund a specific pocket for moonshots, and acknowledging that Meatable will take time, and that's a different kind of risk level, and we okay with that. And if tomorrow we back, like, I don't know, a software company allowing to better treat waste, which is a third or a third of the food is wasted, right, at home, then it would be a very classic, I would say, venture-friendly investment. So I think it's a matrix between the industry, but then the model, the business model, and the technology that can make you say, okay, I'm going to go or not go.
Maybe, Kyle, just if I can add to that. Yeah, and I totally agree, Sophia. I think that's exactly right. I think what's been interesting, and again, I've been looking at the food space probably for, I don't know, the last 7 years. And part of it is just a personal passion. I've been a lifetime vegetarian and just really like a lot of the plant-based protein stuff, just out of selfish demand for eating new products. So I'm always excited when I'm in the supermarket and I find new things. And there's been such a massive growth in the whole space. I think what's interesting is, especially when I talk to some of the more traditional VC investors, there's still this feeling that, and I've had bad experiences with this more as an angel investor, not through Mindshift, but I think we're also investing early stage at Mindshift. I forgot to mention that when we started, but our sweet spot is probably bridged between seed and A rounds. So kind of a pre-Series A is what we really like, because it's not so risky as going in at kind of seed or pre-seed, but then you see some traction. What's interesting in the food space is, the timeline is so long, whether you're looking at the consumer focused or more of the ag tech kind of, B2B sectors, because if you think about how long it takes to scale a business, and then first, you're building out product and then getting the marketing distribution correct, which is where a lot of the food companies sort of fall apart. And then, this whole other space now of kind of direct to consumer, which has just exploded over the last, 12 months, where you've got frozen foods, perishables. No one's really been able to crack that, I would say, because just it's so expensive and so costly to do that, and to do it at scale, I think is really challenging. But then you see valuations going through the roofs, right? So it's like there's a lot of really counterintuitive things happening, where on one side demand is really high, and there's this almost hunger for new products in kind of plant-based, cell-based food. We all know all the issues around supply chain, production, everything that we've seen, growth of population, all the macro level trends that are driving the demand. But then the actual supply side is still challenging, because you've got to figure out, who's the packer that you're going to use? How do you get it across borders, COVID? All the other kind of constraints that I think come with this business model. So I think a lot of it is still really just, we're still trying to figure it out, and no one really knows. I think there's a lot of kind of gambling, I would say, that's happening, especially when you look at valuations, where it's really market driven, and it's not rational in lots of ways. And so then when you talk to I was talking to someone who invested in Field Roast. I don't know if you guys know that brand, but basically they had invested. It took 12 years for an exit. And again, back to IRR and what we look for, as VCs, we're looking at kind of 10x, growth. If you think about, it's going to take 12 years for an exit. And by the way, your fund is limited to 10 years. I know, Sophia, you're doing SPVs, but we're a straight GPLP fund with a 10-year timeline plus we can go out to 12 years. But if we're going in kind of like pre-Series A, and it's going to be a long tail to actually exit the business, your IRR really diminishes, because even if you get the 10x, a 10x over 10 years versus a 10x in 2-3 years is a totally different IRR. So it creates a lot of challenges, I think, for venture investors going into this space. And I think you've got to sort of have the stomach for it, because it's still really new. We know, like, cell-based, the whole moonshot theory, right? SheOak is still pre-revenue, but they're about to raise a Series B, so at a very high valuation. So the growth around pricing and valuation, I think, is really it's very different than what we see in other sectors.
So these are interesting comments, and one of the things that I think about is, like, I think one of the messages, at least that I'm hearing, is that there's a lot of adjustment needed from the VC model when we're going into the food space.
Yeah.
And I believe, now you please correct me if you see it other way, that this might have this might have implications on the type of return you would expect, on the type of governance and how you would connect with the founders and how you'd support them, and even what kind of value the fund is adding to them. I'm curious about what your perspectives are related to what is smart money in this industry. So when you're investing, what could the entrepreneurs expect from you, aside from the capital and aside from that expectation that maybe you're going to help them in the next round with a little bit more capital, and maybe you're going to help them connect with the lead? But what else comes to mind? Maybe Heather will switch it first. Heather goes first, and then Sophia.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because we see the full gamut, I would say. So kind of the more grassroots entrepreneur who, is really passionate about a certain food or product, and then is growing that way. And so for them, I think things like strategy advice on even the distribution model is helpful, just basic business advice. But then also even introductions into new markets, because I think one of the challenges for food, which is very different maybe than some of the other typical VC industries, especially if you look at, kind of the software business is very different. So if you've got to go in and you're distributing through retail, then you've got to get onto shelves. There's a whole SKU registration. I mean, if you're doing e-commerce, it's something else. Direct to consumer, something else completely. So a lot of them seem to need those kinds of introductions, because, and especially when going into a new market. So if they're scaling outside of the US, for example, into international markets, it's a very different space, and often in some markets very regulated as well. So that's something else to think about. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're really bullish on Singapore, because the regulator has been so progressive around just the whole, the food space, whether it's cell-based, plant-based. I mean, there's some really interesting, I think, kind of market-leading activities that are happening there, because that is something that entrepreneurs need to consider when they're going to those markets. But yeah, I think sometimes it just depends. There are so many different kinds of operators that we see, and I don't know, Sophia, if you're seeing this as well. I mean, some come out of they've been in maybe working at Nestle they've been a food scientist for 12 years, and now they've got a food product that they're really excited about. I mean, we see people coming out of more of the science industry, some coming more out of brand. To me, the ideal would be being able to bring together kind of, the food, marketing, science, and then the business categories. And if you can find those backgrounds, and then of course, at least one woman, if you can find all those things and then blend them, then you've got, I think, a really, really strong potential. And I'm happy to talk about some other examples. But one thing that's been interesting for me watching VentureSouq especially is, there's sort of the more grassroots food entrepreneur who I've invested in as an angel. And it's actually been, I think, really challenging for those entrepreneurs to scale beyond just a lifestyle business, which is what a lot of food companies end up being. I mean, they just don't get to the 10x growth, because I would say it's less tech and more food. Whereas if you look at VentureSouq, the two founders have really been very, very ambitious and very driven in how they've been scaling the business, bringing in and kind of predicting the needs around human resources very early. So bringing in, for example, a CFO who actually has taken companies public, kind of, I would say probably 12 months before, I don't want to say needed, but before, investors would start asking, okay, who's your CFO? I mean, kind of everything has been very well planned and well anticipated. Whereas the grassroots entrepreneurs are more, they're learning. This is a lot of times they're first time founders. They're not, serial founders. So it's a different ball game altogether. And I think that affects their ability to access capital as well.
Sophia, do you share that same perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a very broad question. So we sort of have, I understand either the need to kind of think about some examples, otherwise it's so, they're all so different. And
it's extreme of consciousness, yeah.
Exactly. Because otherwise they're all so different. And but I think the basic, as you say, is make them understand that if they take your money, it comes at a cost. And I'm super transparent with them. So the example I gave about Insect was an SPV, but Future Positive Capital is a patient capital fund. So it's a VC LPGP structure, a bit longer term, like we can go up to 20 years. But I'm convinced that some investments should not go in that vehicle, and that's just the really genuinely the truth, So when we can do SPV, we do that, but first sounds basic, but really say, listen, this is our time frame, and this is what's going to be the requirement from our people. Then it's kind of make them understand, be transparent about the LPs you have. Like, for example, us, we are sustainability is at the heart of what we do. So LPs are keen on having that. If tomorrow I would back a fintech company, they'll be like, what the heck, So having an alignment of interest from not just me as a founding GP, but also my LPs up to the founder is critical. So, and that is something that I really recommend entrepreneurs to ask about, what's your time frame of LPs? Where are you in your kind of, investment period? Who are your LPs? Do serial entrepreneurs ask you those questions first meeting? You feel like you're in an interview. They're asking money, but you are the one interviewed, So those are the best, And so that's kind of really the basic. And then I think, in my experience, what people ask is that it depends on the founders, but if I stereotype about people who come from an industry like food and agriculture, those will really need business, so contacts, like typically you need your first pilot, the land. So really like very specific things, access to commercial clients, how you shorten the time to market, like really business. Dozen of examples that you studied as investors saying, listen, you think you're going to need that, it's not going to take 6 months, going to take 12. That facility is going to take 18 months. You can't do that jump from 500 to 10,000. You can do 500 to 20,000. But so like really this kind of business acumen and experience in scaling your facility. And that's what for people who come from more an agriculture and food background. Then you have the people at the opposite come from business and are a bit cliche, honestly, about the space and at the superficial level. And those guys, they need the opposite. They're very good operators. They're going to scale whatever you give them, like a digital socket company or a food tech company, but they have no clue about the industry. And those guys, what they need is that expertise. Is to say like, and that's why I recommend entrepreneurs, and we wouldn't invest because like either we're not a food specific or agriculture specific fund, is a syndication. We bring the business things, hires, scaling, culture, emotional support, simple but super important for founders, etc. But we want to have someone in the syndicate for that specific industry who scaled a business in that specific industry, because we just know that we won't be as good as them for that particular aspect of it, and that's really the importance really of the board composition and the syndication that is critical for every business, but particularly, in a space like the one we're discussing right now, and because you have to go from the top, you won't have a Cargill as a client. You don't go to a conference and you bump into the guy, you want to go right away to to the head of, otherwise forget about it. So it's I don't know if I'm answering your questions, but I think it's really about depending on things. But I think what I recommend entrepreneurs to do, and what we do when we lead or co-lead, is which is most of the time, is to ask the co-investors, like literally to write sort of an email, a sort of a letter of intention of support. Like, okay, concretely, what can you do? And we make sure that around the table we have something that is complementary. And of course, not everyone's going to do 100% of what they wrote down, but there is kind of a mental commitment that I think is very powerful. We do the same, obviously. We start there. We say, listen, this is what we can do. So it's kind of small tips like this, Kayo, that I think actually can really help the entrepreneurs to find the right person for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And one of the things I've seen is unrealistic expectations from both ends, where the investor is sitting down with somebody pitching, and I've heard multiple times, oh, but they don't pitch that well. They're not clear in their communication. I'm like, but the person's a freaking 30-year experienced PhD, and maybe they've just focused on a different thing and not in communication. But the expectation is that there's going to be a super person that does business and strategy and communicates super well and does a beautiful PowerPoint and just everything, right? And on the other end, I've also seen entrepreneurs who say, oh, but my investor can't help me with this thing, or they're giving me questions that don't make a lot of sense. They also expect that just because somebody's a VC investor, they've done it all and they've seen it all and they know everybody. And so these unrealistic expectations just, I think, destroy a lot of relationships. And the suggestion you're giving of maybe setting that expectation in the beginning through some sort of a letter of intent or an email of intent is just great. How has that worked with you guys in your investments?
It worked super well. I mean, most of the are so surprised, are like, what is this, but then it depends, of course. We're a small fund, so I'm asking lot, and again we put a tiny ticket, so it doesn't always work, just to be clear. But I think I think it comes to an alignment of values, right? About first, like, if you really kind of understand that this is something that's going to take time and a lot of support, the way we do it, I mean, I don't want to take too much time on this, but we personally like build a massive Excel, really, based on every topic, like from what I call like transversal support, which is hiring, typically communication, huge, because they don't know, and you shouldn't expect that from them at some point, but they need to be able to raise. That's the real thing. That they don't communicate well, it's okay, but they need to be able to raise. That's the real thing. Nothing else matter, honestly. So if the way of communicating is too far, then the company will struggle, because you can't pitch instead of someone. So those are what I call like transversal things, like pitching, etc. And then really more specific. And then we say like what we understood. Humility is like maybe we didn't understand everything, So this is after a few hours with you guys what we understood. Where we see the opportunity or the challenge, and how we think we can help. So it's a kind of a massive Excel, like if you were part of the team, and we discuss this before we invest. And if we see that we, for example, too far, or like, wait a minute, actually we like this not for us. So it's a good also check for us internally as a GP to say, is it for us or not, before we share it with the entrepreneur. And when we like, like, after 2 hours, there's a long list. We're like, okay, this is clearly our job. And entrepreneurs absolutely love it, because you go deep operationally. And then we share that with the co-investors. And because they see so much work you put it in, when you ask an email, it doesn't feel that much work, honestly. We're like 3 bullet points, you're like, come on, guys, you can do that, and we orient them to listen, this is where we cannot help them. We cannot open those doors. We cannot do this. Is it something you can do? So you can sort of, given with smaller fund compared to most of the people who will lead, we are that voice, which is a bit less controversial, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to set up the term. So it's also easier for me to be that, kind of, mediation in kind of, what the syndication looks like without having that kind of fighting, mode. So that's kind of a bit of a part of our secret sauce with it, and people appreciate it greatly, really.
Well, one question I wanted to ask you both, just shifting up now a little bit away from the smart money pieces. How do you see or do you have a focus in your funds that goes more towards the traditional businesses? So to give a real example, we're all invested in cell-based or cellular agriculture. Would you also look at like traditional livestock deals, and what I mean by that is either technology that in some way improves the efficiency of the farming process, or breeding technology, or direct to consumer e-commerce models, or et cetera, within the traditional realm. Do you have an investment thesis towards the traditional agriculture? Maybe Sophia, you can go first, then Heather.
We don't, because it's not our thesis, and honestly, the reason is return. That's just straight, like venture capital was born to back innovation. So it just doesn't fit, like again, our industry or LPs. That said, I do think there is a lot of opportunity in what we just described. So it's not for us as FPC, but I totally agree that everything can be reinvented, absolutely everything. With the two things in mind, the aspiration of our society, build on their self-awareness and better knowledge of what they eat, of the impact of what they eat, antibiotics, all that stuff. So any product who says, okay, what are the aspiration of Heather? Well, she's a vegetarian, so she's a bit more very good, but let's say less good people, that kind of, like health and stuff like that. But also taking into account the constraint of our environment. And if you just take that pragmatic view, and I'm not even talking about being sustainable or impact, just pragmatic, what do people aspire to today and will tomorrow? And I love your fund, because I love this thesis about thinking about what the next generation wants. Again, within the constraint of environment, and traditional everything can be optimized and improved with that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Kyle, I'm trying to think of what you mean exactly. Are you talking more about like tech-enabled food or ag tech, like?
It could be anything related to the traditional business. So it could be, for example, a marketplace solution that is software-based to enable the direct-to-consumer access to grass-fed beef, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we would definitely look at it. We're fairly open when it comes to just I think just how like tech or how what the actual innovation is, because I think, like Sophia said, so much now is being innovated. And when you look at just even the impact of COVID on next gen values, I think we're going to see lots and lots of shifts, especially in the food space. People really want to know what they're eating. They're very invested now in things like longevity. And there's just so many different dynamics at play right now around health, wellness, food, exercise, fitness. I mean, all of the preventative types of industries that all kind of coalesce. It's hard to look at things in just silos, I think, these days, because if anything coming out of even the pandemic, we know how interconnected we all are. So, you can't just sort of exist on your own, in your own country, in your own town, in your own house. We're all connected, where it's a very, very global economy that we're all part of. And I think especially when it comes to things like food sources, which is a basic need for all human beings across the planet. So how we derive that, I mean, that's where we're seeing a lot more interest in things like veganism. Like, for example, maybe this answers part of the question. We would look at maybe like a blockchain solution to, let's say, fishing. So so you can actually figure out real time, was that fishing boat, what's the source of the fish? Are they overfished? Is it a polluted market? Are the fishing crew on that ship being paid a livable wage? And all of that information can be housed using blockchain technology, sourced and validated, and it can all be real time. So I think through technology, we're given access to a lot more information, and that is what drives purchasing decisions. So whether it's consumers or businesses as the end buyer of that, a lot more information is available and accessible. Big data, I mean, all of these different areas, AI and machine learning, all of these, I think, deeper tech solutions all have applications to something that has been a lifelong source of humanity, really. When you think about food, we can't live without food. So whether that's insects, whether that's cell-based ag, I mean, whatever it ends up being, it's something that's necessary to keep humans in existence.
Just to share a perspective, just to pull a thread of what both of you mentioned just a few minutes ago, I really believe that there is a shift that's needed in the model of funding for different startups in the food and ag space. I think I'll just say one of you mentioned a while ago that it's hard for you to find a business that could just optimally scale, and that traditionally in food we're dealing with real assets and real products, so it's more of a step as opposed to a exponential curve. And I think that rings true for everything related to agriculture and everything related to food. And if you come in with a mindset of coming in from the software world or from just a world where things are easily scaled, you won't be doing your LPs any favor, right? Because you're promising them something you won't deliver, and you won't be doing the entrepreneur any favor because you'll be asking of them something that they're not able to deliver. And so in my mind, there's a really important conversation to be had on what is the investment thesis for each fund, where it relates to what are the expected returns. And depending on where you go in ag or in food, if it's asset heavy business, a capex intense business or anything like that, this might not be a 100x deal. It might only be 5 to 10x or something like that. But
sorry to interrupt. I think there is one caveat to that, that we didn't mention, but that I think is that sort of allow us at least to believe that we can make those deals sometimes. We'll see if we were right or wrong, but is what Heather was saying about speculation. So today the valuation is decorrelating from the value of the asset. There's a big decorrelation, more or less big based on the space. So even like you take some like cell-based is a good example. There's clearly the correlation between what the company is producing today and what's the value. So as a VC, you can go there, saying, okay, I can do secondary in 5 to 10 years and sell to another fund who's going to want to come at that. So you can create that liquidity for your firm only in thematics that have that kind of hypervaluation perspective. It's much more risky because the market can crash. And now it's a good example. So it's a much more like risky strategy, but that's just the caveat where sometimes we feel like, let's just go, because if we don't back those companies, no one will back them. That's also the other truth, because it's so risky that who's going to back them? No one, no banks, no debt. So they need VC, they do need venture. And when you look at the exit market, and we'll see if it lasts, but half of the exit exploded in 2021 in food. I took some notes before, it's like 6 billion, half of it is SPAC, so when you start to have, and the year before was 800, I mean, it's ridiculous, it's crazy, so, and that's what, like, so much capital came in, saying, okay, maybe I can grab one part of that speculative value. So just a caveat to say, like, well, sometimes we sort of try things, but I'm not sure it's very sustainable.
Yeah. Well, guys, we reached the top of the 40 minutes, and I just wanted to really thank you both for your thoughts and sharing everything here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
guys.
Sophia.
Good moderation.
Heather,
Thank you.
Lovely having all of you. So this is one of the areas that we get a maximum number of questions, and it was great to get our experts today to shed so much light on the different areas of it. We will now move to our next panel, which is more closer home, and that is in KSA. The panel is What's Cooking in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have with us Andrew, Hatan, and Khulud from different entities in Saudi who will take us through what the latest trends are, what the biggest priorities are, and which direction we are heading in. I'll also invite Lola to kickstart with the intros, and then we will move forward. Over to you, Lola.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this panel and to see where we are in KSA. If the past 2 years have showed us anything, it's that the term unprecedented times is the only given way forward. So I'm very excited to welcome all the panelists. I want to give you all 1 minute or two to introduce yourselves and give us a brief overview of what you do in the food tech ecosystem in Saudi. Andrew, do you want to start?
Sure thing, Lola. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Yip, and I head up technology and innovation at the NEOM food sector. Well, I'm very passionate about creating systems that can improve human life, and both for now and for in the future. And me going into the agri-food tech space is really pure coincidence. I'm a computational scientist by training with a data and digital consulting background in the public sector in the Middle East. And so there was this opportunity to actually apply my skill set and passion into a very complex system, which is a food system. And why not, right? Here I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hatan, do you want to introduce yourself?
All right. Thanks, you, Lula, and good to meet you here, Andrew and Khulud. So yes, it's an interesting time. So for us as COWS, this is embedded as part of our system. So COWS research focuses on our 4 key research trusts: food, water, energy, environment, and recently added digital that includes AI and cybersecurity, and also health tech that includes computational bioscience. So basically, food is really sits at the epicenter of the research trust at the university. And as a result of that, our role at the Entrepreneurship Center is that to cultivate those kind of research outcomes into products and ventures that really create a difference and create an impact into the environment that we do create. And it's not only we look on the outbound that is coming out from the research pipeline, but also we work with different partners and different players, and we'll talk more about it as we move forward. But it's exciting times, and especially for those big global challenges, because it's stressing the entire universe in terms of the growth, the pandemics, political, let's say, instabilities, and all that kind of stuff. So food, like I said, really at the epicenter of the challenges there, and it's really near and dear to our heart. So we look forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hatan. Khulud, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lola, and hi, everyone. So I'm Khulud Mohammadi. I've been around I would say, the venture capital and entrepreneurship ecosystem for a while. I'm currently an investment manager with FII, Future Investment Initiative. I work with our investment team, the ACT, which is one of the pillars that the Institute worked through on investing in early stage, deep technology startups with an impact-driven vision. So I would say our investment fund is the action call of the Institute. So the Institute's bigger vision is impacting humanity. We like to invest in impactful solutions. Agriculture for us is one vertical out of a bigger umbrella of sustainability. So we do invest heavily in sustainability. It's one of our focus areas, and agriculture comes in under that. And we like the impact of agriculture. It's pretty diverse. I've seen solutions that not only affect food security, but you have solutions in agri-tech that impact climate or energy, or even offering job opportunities for local areas. So that's where the interest in agriculture come from.
Absolutely. I'm very looking forward to hearing all your insights. And with this, I'm going to pass it over to the moderator for this panel, Muna Abu Sulaiman.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lola, for taking over. I was having some tech difficulties, unfortunately, and so I joined in a few minutes late. But I was very happy to have met all the panelists a few days early when we were preparing, and heard many of their amazing ideas and work that they're actually doing on the ground. To understand where we're going is to look at where we have been in the past 3 years. If they have showed us anything, is that the term unprecedented times is the only given way forward. With the ongoing pandemic, economic recovery plans, and ever-escalating climate change, a volatile future is upon us, as our food systems are not as resilient as they should be. As we look to the future, there are many challenges on the horizon, but the right solutions and transformative changes are possible. Food security has been top of mind in the MENA region, rightly so, with many initiatives being launched in KSA. We heard a few of them as the panelists introduced themselves. And this panel will discuss the current landscape of the food and ag tech space in the kingdom and the future outlook for the tech community regionally. I made sure that the intro is said so that we are able to have the recording started a few seconds ago. And I know that the panelists have introduced themselves to all of us, but I think we need to take a step back before we actually discuss the agri-food tech space. For the people who are joining us, the 86 audience members, who not all of them are very much aware of what is going on in this sector. And so perhaps I would like to start with Hatan to begin with, being a representative of COWS, somebody who is in the entrepreneurship sector and who is also very much so into the agri-food, to explain a little bit about what has happened in Saudi Arabia in the past 5 years and why this shift has occurred.
Thanks, Mona, and much appreciated. Yeah, we look forward to it. So if we look at what happened recently in terms of the activities, especially regarding the food and the deep tech space, there's been a lot of great movements into it. And it's not only that, of course. There's been really big shifts in terms of the startup scene. As you're all aware, there's been unprecedented transaction took place, major players, international ones moving into the market, including Sequoia Capital, and also the different unprecedented transactions in the, let's say, in the digital space, like Jahiz going IPO into alternative market, and also Tamara being acquired by checkout.com, and so on and so forth. The list would go on and on. Uniphonic raising from SoftBank as unprecedented transactions. So all that really good stuff. But also there is the area that we're really keen and excited about is that deep tech space. And this is really great news for the deep tech space, where there is a lot of attention now being attracted to that space in terms of seeing some really good outcomes coming out from it. The last few incidents, like the global pandemic and also the political instability, really shook the world in terms of the supply chain for the food industry in general. And it took the regions and different players to reconsider. And the challenge has been always over the past few years is like, how can we bridge the gap or minimize the travel time between the farm to table? And there's a lot of great opportunities, a lot of technologies that are really revamping how this place is taking place. We have few, and then there are some others that are taking place, such as Red Sea Farms, who are developing like a cooling system using seawater, and also they use it for irrigation for premium quality products, specifically cherry tomatoes and many other products. So those areas that are opening new doors in disrupting where we farm and how we farm, and how we bridge the gap between the farm to the table. And that's one of the biggest challenges that would reduce the risk of food security and food stability over the longer run. So a lot of activity has been happening, a lot more examples I will share with you as we move forward on how they're transforming that cycle of harvesting food and bridging the gap between the two. So we're looking forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Hatan. And I know, and the reason that this is very interesting is that because of the Red Sea development with the tomatoes and all these types of vegetables that they're trying actually in cows to see whether they can use salt water, so seawater, to actually create a way of bridging the gap between the food needs of Saudi Arabia and the world, and also the availability of seawater without going through salination, which causes a lot of issues, as we all know. Khulud, I would like to actually ask you a little bit more, since you are part of FII and also an investment manager. Can you tell us a little bit more about what types of investments are being made into this sector? What are the types of things that are being done so we can attract the top scholars, the top companies, and also startups to Saudi Arabia to enable the agri-food technology to be a sector to be created?
I think there's a lot of factors, like Hatan mentioned a few, which is the investor appetite. So if I look back, not only months ago, it was very difficult to see an agriculture startup close around from typical VCs in the region. Most of the VCs at the time were mainly focused on lighter tech, on consumer-facing plays, and agriculture startups or agri-tech startups seemed a bit more sophisticated or a bit too far-fetched to the typical VC. But now every few weeks you hear around closing of an agriculture startup. So I think an appetite with the investors have already been built, and the drivers for that it might be the governmental initiatives built in. There's a few funds dedicated by government on that specific sector. There's regional agencies that advocate and raise awareness. And most importantly, I think if it all scaled down to us individually, I think the concept of sustainability is embedded in us as users and as businesses and corporates, and we think of it continuously, how to make more sustainable, conscious consuming behaviors. And I think that include agriculture.
Thank you so much, Kulbus. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the facilitations that have happened to increase the investment into that sector, and also the direct investment into that sector, being that Saudi Arabia is trying to become a leader in the technology?
Other than investment, you have labs already. KAUST is one of the leading universities that actually attracts people to founders from all over the world to test their products, to see how can they be supported beyond capital. That's one of the, I would say, options founders have. And then advocacy of policy, I think, is important. So if governments are aware of that issues, or government is already supporting sustainable actions, agriculture included in that, have that direct, I would say, communication with decision maker that helps them accelerate their growth individually as a startup. So I think advocacy, more awareness on the sector itself, all of those are facilitators of how to scale those startups. And then, sorry.
Yeah, and I agree, because I think one of the things that have happened is that last year there was the announcement of greening the Middle East. And a lot of people kept thinking that it's just about, well, of course, stopping the desertification of the region and using certain types of plants, but also working with those labs in Saudi Arabia to ensure that they are resilient, that they're not going to affect the ecosystem, and doing it not just for Saudi Arabia, but also for the Middle East in general. But part of the greening initiative is that there's going to be a lot of investments, matching investments into companies that will do farming as well. And so this is something that people don't usually talk about, that this is actually part of Vision 2030, and it is part of that greening initiative. And I think there was a conference about 2 months ago or 3 months ago, where a lot of discussions occurred on the different threads and the different sectors. Andrew, I'm going to ask you a tough question, and it's something that we did not talk about when we were meeting because that information was not made available at the time. But yesterday, there was actually 2 days ago, there was an announcement by the Bill Gates Foundation that AGRA, one of their major initiatives, which included $1 billion of investment from all over the world, governments and different entities and foundations, which is trying to create a better food supply and better food technology. And they were testing it over the past about 10 years in different African countries, mostly through the genetically modified seeds and working on that part of the equation. That it did not yield the results that they expected. And part of the issue was that is perhaps there's a lot of chatter on right now, is that there wasn't a lot of attention paid to the way that the African farmers traditionally farmed and what they wanted to do. And there was this kind of top-down, Western-centric, scientific-led initiative that there are some good examples in some of the countries, but we would say that this initiative is not successful. We won't say it's a failure, but it's not successful. I do know NEOM being the city of the future, being something that we are all looking forward to, the things that are coming out, and the interest in using technology to ensure not only the agri-food sector, but also all parts of our lives are pushed and progress in the right direction through technology. But there's also a lot of Western ideas coming in. How do you, so the question will be, how is NEOM going to avoid this kind of problem that we just heard about the Agra Fund? And what is it doing to progress this whole movement?
Well, I love this question, Mona. This is my dream question, I have to say, because it really hits the nail head on the big question that people ask when they think about NEOM. Is it just another techno-utopia? I mean, to put it very bluntly. And my answer is a resounding no. NEOM is not a techno-utopia. Now, I stated my thesis out there, so let me actually walk you through a little bit of the thinking in relation to the Agra experiment that you mentioned, and also why and what we actually need to pay attention to avoid a techno-utopia. I think that would be of interest to elaborate. So, well, first off, NEOM is very tech forward. So we definitely are very fond of exploring scientifically proven and frontier technologies in improving human conditions, especially in the food realm, thinking about the role of digital technologies and biotechnologies and their roles across the food value chain from production and downwards. The interesting thing really is in, as you said, what works elsewhere, does it mean that it works here? And if we want to make things work here, what does it take to make things work? At NEOM, we have I would say really a three-pronged approach. First is that we believe that technology is not just something to be applied, but something to be adapted, and for it to actually have that transformative power, we need to be very careful on how we apply technologies, which actually bring us to the second lens, which is the policy lens. A lot of times, like people with technologies, they go to a place and they say, you know what, you should all use this technology, but they didn't really think clearly about the context on how technology apply and the people who actually apply those technology, which is the center of it. And here, this is actually a very good time for me to relate the Neom Food vision, which is to build at not using technologies and stuff, but really to build a global community with food at its heart, nourishing both people and the planet. How you do that is by actually putting people at the center. Some of you who might have actually looked at the promotional reel for this panel, I keep talking about the future of food tech is not in the tech. The future of food tech is in people. How do we actually help people think through how they want to solve problem where technology is a vehicle? And that is very central to what we do at Neom. And that brings us to actually the final pillar, which is policy and regulation. A lot of times, like when technologies don't work, usually the technologies would say that, oh, the technology just works fine. It's just, about people not using them right, or there's no environment for it. And Neom addressed that heads on by actually creating the environment where technologies can be nourished and experimented on, and that learnings can be useful for people who actually apply them where where people's livelihoods are actually affected. So I would say that Neom being a place for innovation at the center is about the citizen or the human experience. And it goes beyond just the citizens. It's also the visitors, and it's also the investors and also the technologies who want to cultivate this place for the people, leveraging whatever tools, technology being one of them. And one of the things I actually gained a great inspiration in the past 2 weeks, I want to relate this, and it actually strengthened my resolve in why I believe in what we do and that it is not a techno-utopia. I was just I had the great fortune of participating and contributing at the Sustainable Food Security Summit and workshops at KAUST, hosted by the Center for Desert Agriculture, with a lot of policymakers and technologists and scientists in the same room. And I came to learn that there is so much that Saudi Arabia has already been thinking about through the Saudi Green initiatives, not just about planting trees. That was like my understanding beforehand. But then talking to the people actually running the initiative, I realized it's not the cultivation versus nature. It's really how do we sustainably integrate cultivation and nature and thinking through the role of agriculture in greening the land. And that is a very refreshing perspective. And through that, I come to realize that what we do at Neom has a greater purpose for Saudi Arabia and beyond. And that's something that we are very excited to actually build together with other partners where Neom is an ecosystem for the region.
Thank you, Andrew. Exactly what you were saying. Neom is the place to be, as is KAUST, I have to admit. Those kind of combinations where the technology and the entrepreneurs and the government input comes in. But we only have about 8 minutes. So I'm going to ask 2 questions, and it's going to be kind of like a round fire. The first one is, where are the best opportunities for all those people who are watching us and they want to know where are the opportunities right now? What are the opportunities? So each person give us 2 opportunities, and then we'll go back to the challenges.
So maybe before we go to the opportunities, Muna, I just wanted to highlight one key thing. So working closely with FII and Neom, and the way we look at it, the technologies that are coming out from the research powerhouse at KAUST, we'd love to explore and experiment within this small, controlled environment, but always with an intent to scale elsewhere. whether it's at Neom or Riyadh or all the big cities, in order to deploy that scale moving forward. Going back to the Red Sea Farm example, yeah, there's 1,500 square meter greenhouse being built here at the research park at KAUST, and it's producing really good amount of vegetables that is feeding the community and the supermarket in here, but also they're deploying or retrofitting the technology elsewhere, and they're producing 5 tons of cherry tomato in Riyadh region. They're deploying in UAE and the US as well. So going back to your question, where are the opportunities? I believe the opportunities will be closer to the tech hub, to the entrepreneurs, to the founders, who are really closest to the challenges and there. Another example maybe I wanted to share, there's another company called Natofia. It's self-landed from Estonia to KAUST. And basically they developed this tiny little fridge that you grow your greeneries at home. And the idea, they use capsules, fill into the system, and then over a certain period of time, you could grow your greeneries at home and they would use it. So they're transforming how we consume and grow vegetables and greeneries and that. So opportunities lies within those like tech hubs, innovations, entrepreneurs, founders who are really not happy with the status quo, and they want to reimagine how we do stuff moving forward.
So I'm going to say the opportunity is in the soft landing in KAUST. How do people soft land in KAUST?
So this is a little experiment that we ran over the last quarter of last year. We wanted to explore if we can attract entrepreneurs and technologists into the areas of interest we do have at KAUST in order to explore the infrastructure, brain-powered talent pool at KAUST, but the wider ecosystem at Saudi. So we had an interesting journey. In Jan, we had 5 different startups who self-landed into KAUST for 3 months, exploring the market and exploring the opportunity. The turnout out of the 5, we were aiming to have 1 to consider repositioning or moving forward with it. So far, we got 3 who already decided to open up shop here at KAUST and explore the market. And one of them is in the ag tech space, where they develop those kind of microbial fertilizers for plants that reduce the water consumption and at the same time increases the yield of the crops into those farms. So, and what's interesting about this space is that the ag tech challenge can cascade into other areas. Water, for instance, 80% we all know of the water consumption in the country is used in irrigation. But are we irrigating in a very efficient way? The answer is no. So then how can we, there's so much space.
I remember meeting one of your entrepreneurs who was doing something and they lowered it from 200, I think, liters to 6 liters. So again, the whole supply chain can be soft landed in KAUST from anywhere in the world, and there will be a lot of support. Khulud, where do you see the opportunities?
So I'm fortunate enough to live in an emerging market where there's a plethora of opportunities. The space is not crowded yet. So there's a lot of issues that could be tackled and solved for. I think it depends on the entrepreneur, what they resonate with and where do they want to solve for. And then on top of that, environmentally, we're very unique in the challenges that we have. So a lot of our land is not habitable for farming. We have water scarcity. We have the climate that is not perfect for farming. So we have very unique environmental factors that no one could solve for unless someone comes from the region and solve for. So I would assume the opportunity would come into very unique problems that we face based on our region.
I think that's excellent, because for us, I think the investments will come at things that resonate with our country. And so therefore, if people are looking for investments, if they're looking for support, probably the issues that resonate, as you said, the challenges that we have. Andrew, where do you see the opportunities in this sector, whether it is in Saudi Arabia, NEOM, or the rest of the world?
Well, I'll definitely say that the opportunities are really exploring what the market desire, with healthy and health and sustainability being a major trends that is growing. But then these are still rather new things in and around here. How we can actually help the entrepreneurs to explore the value propositions and really position what works into ways that actually first being feasible in this environment, and to really finding that market traction in a way that actually resonates locally, culturally, and societally. I would say that is the key. I would say that's where the key opportunities lie.
But is there a competitive advantage to our region versus other regions?
Well, absolutely, yeah. So at NEOM, we like to say that you can see that there's nothing, but then you can also say that there's nothing there to stop us. I would here a little bit of an advertisement for NEOM is that if you're actually doing groundbreaking technologies bringing to market, where actually you find it very difficult in saturated markets for penetrate. For various reasons, economic, social market, or even regulatory, I would say that NEOM is a very good entry point because we take care of all these three dimensions and we co-create the ecosystem together with you to land and explore the market together with ecosystem partners like CAUS and FII.
So the competitive advantage, I think Hatan would tell us that it is the setup for the accelerators, I think.
I would say that from my perspective, it would definitely be the ecosystem and the partners and our willingness to actually go into understanding what this region needs. And NEOM is not afraid of failure because NEOM starts from nothing. And so we are very brave in that sense.
Hatan.
Now I would echo Khulud in what she said in that we are a very unique environment with very unique challenges. And actually that puts us at an advantage to solve this problem that is facing the entire globe, which is scarcity of water and desertation. And that can expand all the way to alternative foods or maybe harvesting algae that are very unique to our environment where we get the perfect conditions to harvest those kind of, let's say those kind of products and then derive from it whatever we can create out of it as an option to overcome the global challenges that the face is facing. So it's like the future is in our hands in order to create it as we move forward with those challenges.
Khulud, if you had a moonshot idea for the ag tech space, what would you bet on?
I think we already at FI invested in our moonshot. It's Interstellar Lab. So what they do, they create pods that helps farm and have a habitable environment on Mars in space. And from that, they're scaling down the solution to applicable application today on Earth. So I would say Interstellar Lab is our moonshot. It's part of our portfolio, and I would highly encourage you to check her videos. Barbara, the founder, is very amazing, and they're already working on it, and we're happy to be part of her journey.
I think that this session can go on for an hour because there's so many little things that we can discuss regarding the ag tech space. But let me just say one thing. If there's one thing that you guys can come out of from this session for the people who are listening to us, one is that we are in Saudi Arabia, very competitive. There are a lot of challenges in the ag tech space all over the world, but there's money, there's accelerators, there's a lot of brain power, there's a lot of support from all levels of government that is coming in to ensure that these types of startups that would like to come into Saudi Arabia, or the big companies that want to come and try scaling things, there is a space for them. There is open arms, but also I think what we also came out of is that data is extremely important. Ag tech, like everywhere else in the world, is something that it takes a lot of experimentation to ensure that what works in a small lab actually works on a large scale. And as we saw with the Bill Gates Foundation, you have to take those kind of moonshot bets. You have to try because it is about saving our planet and ensuring sustainability of the food supply. With that, my dear audience, I leave you with just one more thing to think about is what is your moonshot idea and how can you bring it to Saudi Arabia? Thank you so much. And thank you to all our panelists for being here. And thank you to Sonia and the team for enabling this session.
Thank you, Muna. Thank you, Khulud, Hatan, and Andrew for graciously sharing your time and your wealth of insights with us. Thank you. With that, we come to the close of day one, and we're inspired by the shifts that we're seeing at the ground level of companies, government departments, investors, and individuals reconsidering their investment practices and veering towards a stronger focus on conscious investing. The investment strategy where that delivers financial returns along with positive social change. Some of the best examples of this are the people gathered here today. And I'd like to thank all of our fantastic speakers we had this year coming from academia and industry, many who have been deeply embedded in the ecosystem for a while, and many who are on the cutting edge of the impact movement in food tech worldwide. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Wired, the entrepreneurship arm of Aramco, Kaust, the US mission to the UAE, and our ecosystem partner, Silma Mata, for bringing this all together. And of course, our brilliant team behind the scenes from startAD and VentureSouq, who have made this initiative what it is. And last but not the least, all of you who have joined us today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your questions. And thank you for being a part of the program. Don't worry if you've missed any content. The live stream is up on the startAD YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it again. We have another inspiring day planned tomorrow, where we will talk about food supply chain with data and traceability, and a very exciting area of what's happening with cellular agriculture. You all have the calendar invites, and we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care and have a good evening. Thank you.